Hi everyone, this is Dr. Orkun Bajek, and today we are going to continue with another video in forecasting methods. In this one, we are going to focus on if we have trend and random variations in our data set, what kind of methods we can use to forecast the future values. So just to quickly review, what we mean by forecasting is essentially we use past data and we apply some methods, mathematical methods, to forecast the future values. Okay, for example, let's say that you have the sales data for the last 12 years and you want to predict the sales in year 13. In that case, you can use this past sales data and apply a forecasting method and predict the sales in year 13. Okay, so that is the general definition of forecasting. There can be different types of patterns when you look at the time series graph for your data set. You might have random variations like the one on the top left here. You might have some sort of seasonality, which means that in certain seasons of your time horizon, you are seeing this pattern in which there are increases, decreases, then increases and decreases again, and so on. The last one that I listed here is the trend and random variation. So basically, what I mean by trend is when you look at the time series graph, you are seeing that there's an increasing trend here. You might also be seeing something like a decreasing trend, but what we are also seeing is kind of these random variations that occasionally it's going up, occasionally going down. There's no specific pattern, it's kind of random, but in general, you can see an increasing trend. So we are going to focus on this type of data set, and we are going to see how we can predict a future value for this type of pattern. So here I have an Excel template that includes my data set. Okay, so I have a data set in which I have the sales data for the last 12 time periods. In this example, time period corresponds to a month. Okay, so this is month 1, month 2, and so on. So you can also say January, February, March, and so on. And I have my sales data. For example, in January, we sold 28 items. In February, we sold 34 items, and so on. So when you plot a time series graph for this data set, what you obtain is something like this one. Okay, so you have an increasing trend. It doesn't have to be an increasing trend, it could be a decreasing trend too, but it's just that there's a trend in it. So we are going to use exponential smoothing with trend method to forecast the sales in period 13 that we don't know about. Okay, so here is my kind of summarized question. Compute the forecast for period 13 with alpha equals 0.2 and beta equals 0.4. Assume that the initial forecast is perfect and initial trend is 0. So these two sentences provide valuable information because it gives me the alpha and beta values, which are the smoothing constants, as we are going to use in just a little bit. And then it also tells me about the initial forecast and the initial trend. So here's an important piece of information. When it says the initial forecast is perfect, what it really means is your initial forecast is equal to the initial true sales value. Okay, so this means that your initial forecast is equal to the sales amount. Okay, and then your smoothed trend, the initial trend is equal to 0. So the question says the initial trend is 0, so you just enter 0 in this one. So let's leave it like that for now. I just inputted what I know. And I also know alpha is equal to 0.2 and beta is equal to 0.4. So I have a template here, and I'm going to plug in those values that I will use in my calculations later on. Okay, so I have these 3 different calculations here, which will be very helpful to fill out my table here. The first one is to calculate the smoothed forecast for period K. Okay, and the calculation is equal to the forecast including trend from the previous period plus alpha, which is the first smoothing constant, times the difference between the actual sales value in the last period and the forecast including trend in the last period. Okay? The second calculation here is smoothed trend for period K. And it is equal to smoothed trend in the last period plus beta, which is our second smoothing constant, times the difference between the smoothed forecast and the forecast including trend in the last period. All right? And the last formula is going to be the forecast including trend, which is what we are interested in calculating. Forecast including trend in period K is equal to the smoothed forecast in that period plus the smoothed trend in that period. Okay? So let's look at the first period in which I already know the smoothed forecast and the smoothed trend. So based on this third formula here, the forecast including trend is equal to the sum of the smoothed forecast and the smoothed trend. Okay, so forecast including trend in month 1 is equal to 28. So let's get into the second one where we will use these first two formulas. So we are going to calculate the smoothed forecast for period 2. And that is equal to forecast including trend in period 1, the last period. So forecast including trend in the last period plus alpha is equal to 0.2, so I'll pull it from my B16 cell, times the difference between the actual value in the last period. Actual value in the last period is 28, and the forecast including trend in period K-1, which is period 1. So forecast including trend in the last period is also 28, so I pull those from the corresponding cells though, okay? So I'm not typing these because in the upcoming periods, this will be very helpful. I'm not going to need to do this manually. I'm going to use Excel to calculate them automatically for me. So next, we are going to calculate the smoothed trend, and the formula for it is given in this row. Smoothed trend for period K, so the period K corresponds to, in this case, period 2. Smoothed trend in the last period, so that will be equal to whatever is in D2 plus the smoothing constant beta, 0.4, times the smoothed forecast in period K. Smoothed forecast in this period is coming from C3 minus the forecast including trend in period K-1. Forecast including trend in the last period is coming from E2, and the result of this calculation will give you the smoothed trend. And just like in period 1, the forecast including trend will be equal to the sum of the smoothed forecast and the smoothed trend. All right, so that value is equal to 28. So let's get into period 3. Again, we are going to use the first formula first. Smoothed forecast for period 3 will be equal to the forecast including trend in the last period. Forecast including trend plus alpha equal to 0.2 times actual value in the last period. The actual value in the last period is coming from B3 minus the forecast including trend in the last period. Forecast including trend in the last period is coming from E3. So this is going to give me the smoothed forecast for period 3, which is 29.2. So I start immediately calculating the smoothed trend after I finish the smoothed forecast calculation. Smoothed forecast for period 3 is equal to the smoothed trend in period 2, which is coming from D3, plus beta, which is equal to 0.4 coming from E16, times this smoothed forecast in this period. So that value is coming from C4 minus the forecast including trend in the last period coming from E3. Okay? The value of this calculation is going to give me the smoothed trend, which is 0.48. And the forecast including trend is equal to the sum of the smoothed forecast and the smoothed trend. So I'm going to show you something that will help you a lot with the upcoming calculations. So if you look at the smoothed forecast calculation, so look at these two. The number right next to E is increasing by 1. B16 is constant, and B increases by 1, E increases by 1. Let's look at the smoothed trend. D increases by 1, E16 is constant, C is increasing by 1, E is increasing by 1. Forecast including trend, C is increasing by 1, and D is increasing by 1. So here's the trick that we are going to use. If you've seen my previous videos, you know what we do in this kind of situations. So I'm going to go back to the first ever row or cell that I used a function in. Okay, so B16 is constant because it showed up as B16 in the next cell. So I put dollar signs for this Excel cell, and then I do the same for the smoothed trend constant, which is E16, because it also shows up as E16 in the next row, and everything else increases by 1. Okay, so let's look at that again. Everything else increases by 1. Okay, I put dollar signs around E16 and B16 because they will always show up as B16 and E16. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select all of these 3, and I'm going to go to the bottom right and drag all of them at the same time down. Okay? And by doing so, I don't need to calculate any of the upcoming smoothed forecast, smoothed trend, or forecast including trend manually. Excel does that calculation for me. Okay, so let's look at one of these cells. You can see that B16 is constant and E16 is constant. Okay, so what happened is Excel automatically calculated everything by keeping my constant values the same in the upcoming calculations. Okay, so what I have here is my forecast. So let me highlight that area. So this is my forecast. Since the question is asking us to forecast the sales in period 13, and we have trend in our data set, my answer is going to be 53.73 because my data has a trend and I'm looking at the forecast including trend. So the sales in period 13, the forecasted sales in period 13 is equal to 53.73. Okay? So this will conclude this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.